So a lot of the
Okay.
people in China are now like botting and like just absolutely rolling people in Arena right now. So it's not great.
How does a bot roll in Arena?
I couldn't tell you. It's just not a
Dude,
good.
that's how your game is. That a fucking bot
Whoa,
can
this
beat
is
people.
it's a different experience.
Dude.
Hey, what is up, YouTube? Kolst here, and we got a very interesting topic which we gotta talk about here, and that's about botting and how it impacts Arena specifically in Hearthstone. So now, I've been thinking about this video for multiple months, actually. There's been two reasons I haven't made this video yet. First of all, I think talking about this has a lot of potential to make the problem significantly worse, so I tend to avoid talking about it for that reason. But number two, I just wanted to gather more information to fully form my viewpoint over exactly what's going on before I talk about it. However, I've noticed that a lot of people have made quite the habit of talking about this, even making it into their identity and stuff, and these people have also been coming from positions of what I view as extreme ignorance. Thus, I feel like I have to make this video now. I really feel compelled to correct some of this essentially misinformation that's coming out, because a lot of this has been really damaging to the state of Arena and its global community. So to do this, I'm going to explain the situation as well as I understand it, some of the problems I've seen from this, and as well why I have, I think, a unique viewpoint. Obviously, I spent a lot of time with Arena, but also I speak a little bit of Chinese. 我会说一点中文. 所以 I've talked to a lot of people both in the community, some Chinese players, Chinese community members and stuff, so I think I have a very well-formed viewpoint over really exactly what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is what is happening exactly. And one term that's been applied, I essentially coined this, is the term of what a barcode is, which you may have heard as well, and a lot of people might not know. Essentially, I was the one who, I said I coined this, but essentially I adapted it from StarCraft 2. In StarCraft 2, this was a thing that people did, is they made Smurf accounts. In that case, they would actually make accounts that are essentially like a series of lowercase L's and uppercase I's. That way, you can't read the name, really. Technically, the spacing might be slightly different, but like it was essentially an unreadable name. And it's really fitting, honestly. You know, my intros with StarCraft 2 thing, it's kind of funny that potentially my lasting impression on Hearthstone is actually to recycle a StarCraft 2 term. As my introduction to like professional gaming, essentially, or esports, was I was an SC2 caster. That's actually where I started out before Hearthstone even existed. And I applied this term because, you know, they did this to mask their identity so that they could actually queue on ladder and practice decks against other top players. But in this case, I mean, it's a little bit different. It's a similar idea, but they make these names that are just a random garble of characters, essentially. And they're masking their identity from Blizzard so that they can't get banned. At least maybe that account might get banned, but they don't get banned on their main account. And the point is that these are people that are, you know, maybe before they actually acquire the account, before they buy it, this account may have been, you know, botted in some other mode where they actually acquire a lot of gold, and then they can use all of that gold in Arena. If they want to, they can just retire until they get like really good decks, and then they have an unfair advantage. And one thing I want to talk about as well is, why is this a problem now? Well, one thing that happened at the beginning of this year is that there was the closure of the Chinese server. China used to have its own server separate from even Asia server, where you essentially, I think you actually had to have like a Chinese ID to even sign up to the server, I believe. And within this server, it was well known that there was a whole lot of this kind of botting going on. And there's a whole thread from Benage, who is a reporter, like an esports reporter from China, who has talked a whole lot about this, but essentially you can talk about potential reasons why this was such a problem in China, but what I believe one of the biggest reasons is that China was just relatively isolated from the rest of the world, and specifically from Blizzard's attention. One thing that's for sure is that Blizzard simply they were not enforcing the rules well in China server while that existed. This was a well-known thing that was going on for years, but it was relatively contained to the China server. It was actually a real thing that on Chinese streaming sites like DouYu, for example, streamers could blatantly cheat. They could buy decks from their viewers on stream it there, and literally nothing would happen to them. You might even see some of these complaints bubble up to, like, you know, places like Western media like Twitter, Reddit, etc. But, you know, Blizzard just didn't see enough of it. It's not a big enough of a problem. It's not affecting the rest of the world, so Blizzard just didn't care. So I think ultimately a lot of the fault for this really does square back on Blizzard for not managing their own, you know, maintaining maintaining their TOS in all of the regions of the game. And it was with the breakdown of the NetEase deal and all of that, that this stuff really just spread like wildfire over to all the other regions, because the Chinese players, they couldn't play on China's server anymore. So of course they had to emigrate to the other server. And so with that, let's go back a little bit to talk about this clip from Rarin. I'll play this, at least this portion in its entirety with a little bit more context. I guess this is like, I don't know exactly, but some kind of a debate with Farfa. They're basically arguing about whether Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Hearthstone is the better game, the better gameplay experience, but also the gameplay itself. And so by the way, just to mention, I'm not really familiar with Farfa at all. I am familiar with Rarin, of course, Rarin being a big, mainly YouTuber for Hearthstone.
The issues with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is there is no other way to play the game online. You have constructed ranked current format. That's it. There's no alternative. There's no draft mode. I don't know how is Arena still a thing? I kind of enjoyed Arena when I played it a little bit.
Arena
I think
is still
something
there.
that would.
Yeah, it's still there.
Is it popular? Do people play it?
It's still popular, but recently, I don't know if you heard, Blizzard is no longer in China. So a lot of the people in China are now like botting and like just absolutely rolling people in Arena right now. So it's not great.
How does a bot roll in Arena?
I couldn't tell you. It's just not.
Dude, that's how shit your game is. That a fucking bot can beat people.
It's a different experience.
Dude,
it's a different experience.
Dude, go on my YouTube and type in Farfa bot tournament, right? These bots could not beat a 3-year-old. I'm just saying, right?
No,
your game can be piloted by NPCs. Oh,
it's not. Listen, I'm agreeing with you that being like having bots in the game is definitely negative, but I think it showcases how easy Hearthstone is as a game, like to get into if bots can play the game at a pretty good level, right? People listen. People always call me copium and whatever they want to say, but like Hearthstone is a very easy to get into, but it does have a lot of nuance as you get to the highest ranks in the game. Like there's a lot of decisions you have to make.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's maybe as in depth as Yu-Gi-Oh or as in depth as Magic, but when people call Hearthstone a baby game, like they're probably fucking gold, like or silver. Like there's no way.
Thing I want to address first of all is that Farfa is right about one thing. The bots people use in like generally in these card games are bad. The ones they're using in Hearthstone, they're not meant to be able to win. They can win sometimes, but their purpose isn't to win. It's just to farm gold. And that's where Rarin puts out this major piece of essentially misinformation, where it's like, it's completely ridiculous to think that these bots are actually playing Arena and actually, you know, demolishing regular players. You really do not see bots actually play in Arena. I think I've played like over 35,000 games of Arena, and I think I've played a bot one time. That's what I think. It's pretty easy to tell when you're against a bot, and because once you suspect it, you can kind of, you know, you can just like rope and point lethal at their face and they emote them, they don't leave, you know, that kind of thing. So it's pretty obvious generally, and just the way they move and stuff, like you can kind of tell. You do not see them in Arena. You do actually see them. They can do pretty well in other modes. Like they used to fill up Legend in Classic mode while that still existed. Nowadays, since Classic mode got removed, from what I understand, most of them have migrated to Wild. Some of them are in Standard as well. And a lot of them do get stuck in like the Diamond 5 floor, from my understanding, in Wild. A lot of them are playing, you know, something relatively simple like Aggro Rogue or Totem Shaman, for example. And they can do relatively well in that mode because it's pretty easy. As long as you spend your mana, you're going to have a pretty good shot. But there's just so much more to the game in Arena. Like the draft, you can follow like a kind of a draft helper, so to speak. But like it's just so much harder to actually draft a cohesive deck. And playing Arena is actually a lot more difficult than piloting those decks as well. So it's completely ridiculous to think that they could actually perform well enough, because it's not just about winning even like 50% of your games. To really make Arena worth it, you have to get a really high win rate, and there's just absolutely no way they can do it. There are no bots in Arena because the return on gold just simply isn't worth it. There's no reason. They'd rather sell the account with the gold on it than waste all the gold playing with a bot in Arena. And be very clear, it's not like you couldn't utilize AI, put a whole bunch of resources into machine learning and make a really good Arena program. I'm sure you could, but that simply hasn't been done. These bots are not intelligent enough. And to talk about what Blizzard's been doing about this year, I do think, you know, I've seen some things. I can't say everything I've seen, but I do think they really do care about the botting problem. I mean, think logically, like, they don't necessarily care that much about Arena itself necessarily, but this is a situation where other people are making money from their game and not them. So Blizzard 100% cares about this. Celestron has tweeted about they botted some number of accounts, like what was it, like 60,000 bots or something. Even though they don't necessarily say where these bots are, they might have just been people, you know, farming like mercenaries for experience as well, not even in Wild or something. So I do think they're trying. The issue is that this really is, I think, a really difficult problem to solve for them. And they may have hands tied because it's not directly profitable for them to really invest a whole lot into this. The big problem is like just thinking logically, like if they can't ban the bots so fast that they can prevent the sale and potentially prevent the use of the gold on the accounts, it doesn't really matter. Like once the account's been churned and burned, it doesn't, you can ban it. It just doesn't matter. No one's going to play it anyway. And there are other things they could do. Like some people mentioned, like removing the retire button to at least put the wins back into the arena pool. If these people are going to, you know, spam retire to get these broken decks, at least you put the wins back into the pool so people are getting the gold, but it wouldn't really help all that much. Like it wouldn't help the gameplay experience. Okay, you get one free win per run per average, but like it just doesn't, you know, it wouldn't make it feel that much better. But with that, I want to talk a little bit about just like, so really what is the negative impact of this on the arena players? And you know, I don't have a lot of hard evidence. Maybe Blizzard does to actually have a little bit of a better idea about what's really happening. But what I think is actually happening is that a lot more than people are really doing, like making like true barcode accounts where they're really spam retiring whatever, is that people are just playing on essentially throwaway accounts. They're not like cheating because they're not spam retiring for broken decks, but they're just doing it because it's cheaper to have a new account this way than it is to actually, you know, buy arena runs with money. And it's worth bringing up that you can actually add some of these accounts. A lot of them will actually talk to you, especially if you know how to speak Chinese. It makes it a lot helpful. Like I added this one guy who's Chinese, and by the way, this account looks like a barcode, but it's not a barcode. It looks like random characters, but I actually asked him, and this account was actually made based off of his initials, his real life initials. That's what he said. And he's definitely not a barcode because he actually had like a 5.5 average. He's a good player. You can't, if you retire, your leaderboard average goes down, so you can't do that if you're retiring a bunch. And I've seen a lot of these accounts where they might look like a barcode to an untrained or uneducated eye in Chinese, but if you put it into a Chinese keyboard, it will actually mean something. And the thing that's ironic is I've seen some instances of streamers who are actually effectively barcoding themselves. They've actually started re-rolling accounts and just like actually retiring the bad decks and stuff. They're effectively being barcodes themselves, and then they'll face some of these other accounts that are not barcoding, but they'll say, oh, because they can't read the name or it's in Chinese or something, they accuse it of being a cheater. This is a clip. I removed a lot of the screen and the sound, of course, from the clip because I don't want to draw attention to exactly who this is, but this is a clip I did take from a streamer who points to a bunch of names, and just you can see him individually clicking each one of them to point out that they are cheaters, and that's what he's saying in the clip. And the funny thing is that if you look at one of these names, and the one I'll highlight right here, which you see him click as well, that's not even a Chinese name. That name is Korean. And I've seen some instances and also heard this happening for just other kinds of names, like Japanese names, Korean again, like Thai or Arabic, even like Russian names, just anything basically. If you as a Westerner can't read, people will just say, oh, that must be a cheater. And I think this is a real problem because essentially what's happening is people are just seeing ghosts, right? The ghosts are everywhere. You see this. So it's like, even if the problem hypothetically gets solved, if you just assume every account that's Chinese is a cheater, or any account you even think is Chinese because you just can't tell the difference, you would never know if the problem actually got fixed. And by the way, like the Chinese accounts are not just going to leave. There's no, ETA on like the Chinese server possibly coming back. It might never come back. So these accounts are home to the other servers now. They're not just going to go away. And yeah, you can point at like the basic card back, lack of golden hero power, but in that, yeah, they'll tell you it's a new account, but ultimately you just don't know if a particular account is actually, barcoding or botting, cheating, you actually retiring 4 broken cards. So you just ultimately you don't know. So I don't think it's productive to constantly go out and accuse every single account of doing this when you really just have no idea. And I just want to say, by the way, I'm a bit sympathetic to these people because, if they lost their server, their main account, which they might have invested hundreds or even thousands of dollars into it, they might be a little bit burned against Blizzard. So why would they want to invest a whole bunch of money into a new account? Like, I can't really blame them for using throwaways when they're in that situation. And it's why I think it's particularly nasty, as Benage pointed out in his Twitter thread as well, that if you're painting all these people with one brush, because okay, maybe some of them are botting, but also some of them just have a lot of experience playing against these bots, and they've been essentially refined their strategies, has gotten good at beating people with better decks than them. And that's why you see a whole lot of them at the top of the leaderboard as well. And with that, regarding this, I want to talk in closing about the impact on really the competitive viability of Arena, as little little as people still care about that. I mean, some of us would at least like that to be a thing. I think the problem really does ultimately tie back to Blizzard, not just in how they were mismanaging essentially the Chinese server while it existed and how that unfortunately closed and kind of released it to the rest of us, but also the problem is that they foster an environment in game quite willingly that just really allows these botted accounts to thrive. It creates a huge incentive to retire for better decks because they essentially have such poor balance of cards. There are some cards that are, most cards are like reasonably average, whatever, but there's just a pretty good selection of cards. You can mention like Titans, Trial by Fire, Infinitize. I mean, there's a whole lot of these cards that are just like really strong, way better than almost anything else. And there are a lot of cards that are really bad that weigh down a lot of decks too and create the decks that you actually want to retire. Through all of this, you create all of this inherent variance in deck quality that creates this incentive to retire and for people to bot these accounts to only be able to play the better deck. And I think there are a lot of ways you can address that, which I've already kind of implied. You can ban certain cards and stuff like that. But particularly, I think the biggest problem is having these top-end broken cards because basically any idiot or even a bot, potentially some of these decks, from what I understand, are actually drafted by bots. And any bot can know it's a broken deck if you just have a Titan in it or whatever, right? Like there are literal keywords in the game that just say, hey, my deck is broken because I have this card, right? And there are just other really high roll cards as well. So it becomes really, really easy to identify these extreme high roll decks that they can then sell or whatever. If this was not a thing, if the game was a lot more balanced essentially, and there were like better class balance as well, by the way, Blizzard's essentially given up class balance lately in Arena as well. That would make it so it would be a lot harder to actually identify which decks the high rolls even are. And it would take there'd be a lot more skill into, deciding your deck synergy, constructing the deck itself to build a cohesive deck, which can actually perform well rather than just jamming it with the most premium cards, which is essentially what we have now. And it's really shocking to me that they haven't really done anything to resolve this aspect of the problem, because this is a much easier problem to solve effectively than actually fitting the bot problem. The issue is that I think it's really important to Blizzard to keep these cards in, because essentially it provides a carrot for weaker players to have hope they can eventually they'll get the Titan themselves, so it'll be their chance to go 8 wins or 10 wins or 12 wins when otherwise they would have absolutely no chance of doing it. Essentially, you have to be able to have those high rolls, those jackpots to hit in the slot machine to actually let people hit the jackpot sometimes. Otherwise, they just won't want to play. They'll lose. And it is a challenge, right, for sure, because they need to have, weaker players interested as well to actually want to play to feed the system. But ultimately, for me at least, this isn't a gameplay experience I'm particularly interested in, when so much of it is just whether or not you hit the right slots. Essentially, I actually live in Vegas nowadays. If I wanted to, I would actually just walk down the street and play slots if I wanted to. This is not the experience I'm looking for in Hearthstone personally in Arena. So, and that's why you've probably seen me start to do this, especially on Twitch and some of my YouTube videos as well. I'm going to be playing a lot more variety moving forward until if and or when Blizzard actually takes some real concrete steps to actually fix this problem from what I see. Because otherwise, I'm just not that interested in this game right now anymore. But with that, I'm interested to hear what you guys think as well. Of course, there's a lot going on here, so any additional insight you might have as well would be definitely very interesting to hear. But with that, appreciate everyone for hanging out, of course, and we'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.